Recently, we made a video about the world's biggest mistakes, and a lot of you commented to continue this type of video. So in this clip, we're gonna talk about more mistakes that caused a lot of people to die, and it cost a lot of money. We hope you enjoy. We start with the most famous ship in the world, the Titanic. In the year 1912, when the Titanic was planned to have its maiden voyage, even before it started the voyage, there were plenty of warning signs that in this route that there is a whole lot of ice glaciers, and they were always told that they need to watch out. After a few stops, the Titanic began its voyage and it went towards America, and non-stop the telegraphs were coming that there is ice glaciers here, there's ice glaciers there, and you need to watch out. Many of the warnings were sent by the captain of Carpathia, Captain Arthur Rostron. But Edward Smith, the captain of Titanic, was ignorant and didn't pay attention to any of this. He had too much pride. He would think to himself that I have the most advanced, fastest ship in the world. I'm not like you guys. And he went at full speed towards a killing field of ice glaciers. At this time, the Titanic was known as an unsinkable ship. Captain Smith was so arrogant that he would even talk smack to the other ships, and sometimes he would even tell them to shut up. Everybody knows what happens to the Titanic. They go in the middle of the route, they hit an ice glacier in the side, and Captain Smith drowns to death. This was a huge mistake that was mainly caused by pride. When you have too much pride, mistakes like this can always happen. Another huge mistake that happened because of pride was Napoleon attacking Russia. Although it wasn't the Russian army that defeated the French army at this time, it was the Russian weather that eliminated the entire army. And it's interesting to know that in World War II, the Germans did the same thing. Too much pride caused them to lose the battle in Russia, mainly because of the weather, and history repeated itself. Let's go to the next mistake. You guys are familiar with the company Lockheed Martin that makes different types of weapons and aircrafts, but it's interesting to know that they also build satellites. In the year 1998, NASA decides to make a deal with Lockheed Martin, and they order a certain satellite that could study the atmosphere of Mars and send the data back to Earth. After making the deal, Lockheed Martin decides to start. They built the satellite and it's ready on time, and it's supposed to be sent to space by a NASA rocket. But unfortunately, the satellite gets lost in space. It's not like they lost it where they can't see it. They couldn't control it. But why is that? Did Lockheed Martin not know how to build satellites? No, that's not the case. But they had made a huge mistake. All the measurements that was used in the computer and building this satellite was in inches. But all the equipment that NASA has works in millimeters and centimeters. So nothing corresponded to one another, and that is why when it went to space, all the equipment NASA had wouldn't make sense with the Lockheed Martin satellite. $125 million gets lost in this situation, which is about $170 million in today's money. The satellite is still hovering around in space, but they can't control it, and it's not worth it to spend a whole lot of money to go save it. And that is why it gets lost. Alright, let's leave space and go look at the next mistake. In the town of Cerro Grande in the state of New Mexico, the firefighters in this state were doing an operation called a controlled fire. This is when they take a certain area that has a lot of dry grass that has a potential of catching fire. So before it naturally catches on fire, they make it go on fire, but they control it so it doesn't spread to somewhere that has the potential of being dangerous. New Mexico is a state in the US where it rains in the winter and the grass turns green. But as soon as it starts to get warm, it gets drier and drier. On all that green grass turns into dry grass that's extremely flammable. That is why in some places in the world, like the state of New Mexico and even California, they have to do a controlled fire to get rid of the potential of a massive fire. But let's see what the mistake is. Just like we said, the operation started in Cerro Grande in New Mexico, but it seems like they didn't check the weather and they didn't know that strong winds are coming up. They start the fire and a massive area in this part of the town catches on fire. But all of a sudden, a strong gust of wind comes into the fire. And what does this wind mean? It's fuel for the fire. It's like pouring gasoline on top of it. And the spread speeds up after every minute. This mistake caused this area that caught on fire to take over the entire town. And instead of being a firefighter, it seems like they're a fire spreader. The fire continues for 1 month straight, where 20,000 hectares are lit up. And it was expanding to places where a lot of people lived. In some cases, they got lucky because New Mexico is not a populated state. If something like this were to happen in California, where it's the most populated state in the US, it could have been a lot more deadly. Instead of 400 homes being burned down, it would have been thousands of homes and more than $1.5 billion in damages. Since we're talking about fires in California and New Mexico, let's go to California and see another huge mistake. In the year 2003, in the city of San Diego, California, a man had been drinking too much. He comes outside of his house, goes to the back of it where there's a lot of grasslands, and decides to shoot a flare into the sky for fun. He didn't realize that the flare he just shot has fire in it, and there's a whole lot of dry grass around him. As soon as the flare that's lit up lands in part of the dry grass, it engulfs in flame like it's gasoline. After this, the man that shot the flare goes home to get some rest. But soon after, they come knocking on his door that you have to leave because the whole neighborhood is on fire and you can die. This fire expanded 150,000 hectares. More than 3,000 houses burned down, and 14 people die in this situation, and also $2 billion in damages. After every fire, experts come in to check how this fire started. And after investigating for a while, they realized that it was a flare in this part of San Diego that it started this insane fire. After they realize what has taken place and the people complaining, they bring the same person that was allegedly drunk that shot the flare. When they asked him why you shot it, he said, "I went hunting in the backside of my house, but I got lost, and the only thing I had for help was to shoot this flare, so that's why I decided to shoot it." You could say what he said saved his butt. There's a rule in the US is that where you get lost, you are allowed to shoot a flare to send a signal for a potential help. Since he said he got lost, they couldn't charge him for anything, and they couldn't put the blame of the fire on top of him. Also, the story that he was drunk when he shot it was made up by other people. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But he never admitted to being drunk. He said, "I was lost." Let's go look at the next mistake in Japan. There's a massive company in this country called Sumitomo. You might be familiar with some of their products, like for example their tires. But the tire manufacture part is a small portion of it because they operate a lot bigger businesses. In the year 1996, Sumitomo had 5% of the world's copper. The CEO of the company, meaning Yasuo Hamanaka, decided to play around with this 5% of copper he had in his hands. His plan was to put a whole lot of copper into the market to bring the price down. Then, when the price settles, he buys all of it back at an insane profit. He would keep doing this over and over. He does this a few times and brings in a whole lot of profit. But when you get to September 1996, Yasuo Hamanaka buys a whole lot of copper, and he's waiting for the price to grow again so he can sell it once again and make a whole lot of money. But it never goes up, and it continues to go lower and lower. This mistake committed by Yasuo cost the company $2.5 billion. In most capitalistic countries, doing something like this is very illegal because you can't manipulate the market like this and make a whole lot of money out of it. And that's why Yasuo Hamanaka gets arrested and gets 8 years in prison for this. And after this took place, Sumitomo apologizes to the public. But a lot of people say they wouldn't have apologized for 1,000 years if they didn't get caught. The only reason they gave that speech is because they were caught doing something like this. Let's go to the northern part of the earth, Alaska, a place with a whole lot of oil and it's extremely cold. You might be familiar with Exxon, one of the biggest oil companies in the world. One of the oil tankers that this ship had was the Exxon Valdez. And the captain of the ship is a man named Captain Hazelwood. And he's heading towards Alaska with the empty tanker to fill up and come back down. When he gets to the port of Prince William in Alaska, he stands there to get filled up. And 760,000 barrels of oil is pumped into it. Until everything gets finished up and the Valdez is ready to go, it's 12 at night. Before they go on the voyage, Hazelwood has drank a lot of alcohol, and you could say he's drunk. Why is a captain of a ship like this in the middle of an operation like this drunk? We're not sure, but a lot of people say he was an alcoholic, so that makes up the reason. Either way, the ship continues on its voyage, and Hazelwood is drunk. He decides to take the same route that he took to get there on his way back. But he didn't realize that the place he took is much more shallow than the place he's supposed to be. And that's what causes the bottom of this massive oil tanker to hit the bottom of the sea. Hitting the bottom of the sea damages the ship so bad that the oil inside the ship starts to leak out, causing a massive oil spill. It would have been good if the ship just stopped. But unfortunately, that was the least of the worries, because all that oil is quickly coming out. They come from everywhere to help out stop this leak, because it was destroying everything. Until they stop it, 20% of the load, meaning more than 150,000 barrels of oil, had spilled into the sea. Everywhere there was oil. Hundreds of thousands of animals were affected and thousands of animals were dead. To clean the water, it cost more than $8 billion. Taking the ship out and fixing it was on Exxon's side. Captain Hazelwood is arrested and they take him to court. The prosecutors say that he is guilty. Not only was he drunk, he also didn't know how deep the oil tanker goes when it gets filled up. This is when the judge comes up with the sentencing. He does not get prison time. First of all, he gets $50,000 of fines. Second of all, he gets his captain license taken away. And third of all, he's supposed to do 1,000 hours of community service. When you get community service in court, you could count it as any type of free work for the government, mainly cleaning parks or the side of the roads and freeways. Alright, let's get to the last mistake. Maybe you remember in school or maybe you read about it. But in the year 1986, the Challenger shuttle exploded midair. In January 1986, 7 astronauts got on board of a rocket that was made by NASA, and they were gonna go to space to deploy a new satellite. Everything is going well. The astronauts are in place and the rocket is going up, but it only takes 72 seconds for everything to go wrong, and the Challenger explodes midair. All 7 astronauts were immediately killed, and there was $11 billion in damages. After an explosion like this, the people at NASA wanted to figure out why this explosion took place, and that's only 72 seconds after flight. After a lot of investigations, they realized that the sealant they use in between the panels were giving out because they weren't the proper quality they needed. And the defective sealant killed 7 astronauts and $11 billion in damages. NASA took 100% of the blame, and they blamed it on the sealant that was not properly made. Either way, 7 astronauts were killed.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.